Hey everybody, I'm Ryan from Wakesurfmedia.com and welcome to another edition of Hands On. In this video, we're going to show you guys how to install some agenda traction here on our Soulcraft that we got from WakeOutfitters.com. So the first thing you're going to... Stop that. I don't know.
I'm so confused.
So the first thing you're going to want to do is gather some materials. You're going to need to have your board out. You're going to need your new traction. You're going to need anything that you're going to use to remove the old traction, such as a heat source like a hair dryer that we have here. And you're going to need either some masking tape like this or a pencil for some markings. So the next step is going to be to remove the fins from the board. This is especially important for surf style boards like this where you've got larger fins. It's not hard to install when the fins are on the board, but you don't want it to be leaning like this a lot if you can help it, or maybe rocking back and forth. And since it's a lot easier to do this on the ground level, you never want to step on your board when you've got those fins on or anything like that. So as you can see here, we've got our fins off, and I think we're ready to rock and roll. So for us, what we did first is when we got this Soulcraft, we were riding it with just wax on the front and the stock Soulcraft traction back here on the back. The stock traction is pretty good. We're just used to Agenda. We love the way that it feels. And plus, it's so cool. We ended up with these great colors. So we're gonna install that instead of the standard Soulcraft stuff here. And I could never really get used to only riding with wax in the front. I really like having at least a traction pad underneath my front foot with some wax on top of that if I can. That just is the way that I prefer everything. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I would say the first thing to do is to go ahead and remove any wax on the board that you may have. And before we get to our heat source, this is especially important because, as you probably know, melted wax goes everywhere. It gets all over the boat. It gets all over you, gets all over your feet, your board shorts, and that's just kind of not good for anybody. So if you can prevent that, let's go ahead and do it. So just go ahead and remove it. We've already done that here, and I think it's about time to go on to our next step. So as you saw before, we already have a set of rear traction here on our board. I really like the way it's placed. I think the spacing of it, how far it is off the back of the board is great. I've gotten comfortable with it. I'm used to it on this board. So I want to replicate that with our new traction. The easiest thing to do is just get you some masking tape. And since this happens to be a 3-piece rear set and it's broken up into 3 different areas here, I'm just going to take the very far back 2 pieces, which is the left and the right, and I'm going to use my masking tape here to mark where it needs to be at its lowest point down on the board. So my masking tape is just touching the very back of the traction here. And I also want to say, I know some boards are coming without traction now, or you may have just not ordered any traction with your board. So if you don't have anything, if you got just a complete blank slate and you don't know where to begin, the easiest thing to do would be to go online and try and find a picture of your board with traction on it and replicate that. And if you can't find it, or you just kind of want to do it on your own, I would say put your rear traction usually about an inch, somewhere between an inch and 2 inches away from the very back of the board. I think mine right here is right at about an inch, and I really, really like it. So just kind of line it up there and just kind of eyeball it, or put your masking tape back there without any traction at your 1 inch mark and kind of go from there. So now is when we're going to actually start to try and remove some of the traction. I've got my heat source right here, being a hair dryer. I'm going to use the lowest warm setting and the lowest speed setting. But first we want to pause and just say, this is the part where stuff can go wrong and you want to be very cautious when you're doing it. The reason why I like using a hair dryer over a heat gun is I feel like a heat gun gets way too hot and it doesn't disperse a lot of that heat evenly, kind of like a hair dryer would. It focuses it really intensely on one spot versus kind of spreading it out. The other method you could do is on a super warm sunny day, you could leave your board outside, but again, it's easy to forget about when it's out there. You're not constantly checking it and you don't want to cause any delamination. A hair dryer can certainly cause delamination just like leaving it outside, but I feel a little bit more in control when I can just remove the heat as I'm doing it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just start warming stuff up. I'm gonna go really light over it just to kind of introduce a little bit of heat to everything. If you've got a little bit of wax on here like we do, It's gonna get sticky and it's gonna be messy. That's okay, it's just a part of it. And I might speed the video up throughout here just a little bit. But I'll try and slow down at the parts where I'm kind of discussing it as well. So there's not really a way to tell if it's too hot or if it's not, if it's too hot. You just kind of have to go by feel. I usually just try and put a little bit of heat and take it away, a little bit of heat and take it away. And as you can hopefully see, a little bit of it's starting to come up here. I've got a pretty good piece. The newer the traction is that's on the board you're removing, the bigger pieces you're probably going to get off of it. If you've had the same board forever and it's got really old traction, it's most likely going to split off a lot. That's totally cool. It just takes a little bit of extra time to get that stuff off, but don't be discouraged by it. That was a pretty good piece. I'd say this temperature right now is really not that bad. As you can tell, I've got my hand on it and it's not burning or anything. So it's warm for sure, but it's not blistering hot or anything like that. I can keep my hand there for a pretty long time and not be too uncomfortable. So it's split a little bit here. That's no big deal. You can just try and use a touch more heat or leave the heat on there for just a little bit longer. And really, this is pretty much the process. You just do this all over the board, front and rear, if you have front traction as well. I'm probably going to go ahead and speed the video up here. So as you can see, the traction came off actually pretty good. It wasn't really that old, so that's kind of to be expected. You can tell it left a little bits of traction behind, and it also has a little bit of adhesive behind as well. You can try and get that stuff off with your finger, but this is where the Goo Gone is going to come in handy. You can get it pretty much at any hardware store or a big box retail or something like that. And yeah, just use teeny tiny little bits of it on a washcloth or a paper towel as you try and get this stuff off of there. I'm sure you can tell from watching that short clip, this is by far the most tedious part of the whole process. But take your time, go slow, use minimal pressure to make sure to not damage the board or anything like that. The better you do this, the better the end result will be. So just take your time, drink a whole big bottle of patience before you do it. And you'll be just fine. So the next thing that we're going to do is apply the rear traction. I always feel like it's easiest to apply the rear traction first and then move on over to the front. Once you have a solid base being the back, then you can kind of tell where you want things to go up front. So I'm still going to use my masking tape portions back here to put these back two pieces right where I want. I'm actually going to start with the center piece. I know that sounds weird, but I'm going to get these two things lined up. If you have a stringer in your board, a little wood that runs right through it that you can see, hopefully, that's right in the middle of your board. And that's a good way to kind of tell if everything is aligned as far as left and right on the board. So I'm just going to check these things one more time, make sure they're in a good spot back here. And it looks like they are. So what I'm also gonna do, actually I got one right here, a piece of masking tape. I'm gonna mark off the front right where the middle is, or where the middle's gonna end up. And I'm just gonna take these two away. I'm gonna try and apply my first piece. What I would suggest doing is peeling off just a little bit at first. That way you can kind of pick it up and adjust if you need to. I'm actually going to start at the back of the board. So So I'm using my stringer for a center point. And if you don't have a stringer or you can't see your stringer, measure on your board and grab some masking tape and just run a straight piece of masking tape all the way up through the middle of your board from the tail to the tip, and then you can use that as your center line. But fortunately we've got a stringer right here, so I'm just gonna let this center piece touch the masking tape up there. I'm gonna make sure the point of the traction back here is or right in the middle. The groove of this point is pointed right at the stringer. I'm just going to kind of press down, and what that can allow me to do is wiggle it just enough to where if I've made an error, I can either pick it back up completely like that, or I can just kind of swivel it like I was doing a second ago. So I've got it right in the center, found the stringer. I've got the front masking tape bumped up right against the top of the traction. I've got this pointed part right in the middle of the traction, right lined up in the center over the stringer. I'm gonna go ahead and press down on the back. I'm gonna lift this up while I'm still pressing down, and now this piece is ready to go. Just gonna lay it down real gently. I can rip it back up at this point if I need to, and just kind of help align it just a touch, just kind of like that. Make sure it's straight. Got those points right in the middle. Everything looks pretty good as I can get it. I try not to sweat millimeters being off. I try to only worry if it's like inches off on one side or another. Millimeters you can deal with, and if you ever watch your feet out there while you're wake surfing, they move millimeters and centimeters and sometimes even inches at a time underneath you. So if your traction is just a touch off, don't worry too much about it. So now I'm going to line these other two pieces up of the rear, and I'm going to see how close we are on our marks. We are dead on. That is awesome. So what I'm going to do here is pretty much the exact same thing that I did previously. I'm going to start on the back, just on one side. I'll start on this right side first. And I'll use this point of reference back here where my masking tape still is to put the point of the back of the traction. And I'm just gonna lay it on down and do like what we did the other time. Gonna do the same thing as last time. I'm going to line it up on my masking first. I'm just gonna kind of put it down really gently, using one way first, like right on this edge. And if I like the way everything looks, I can go ahead and commit and start pressing down. Everything looks pretty good. Now that we have this set up, the question is, how do you mark your front? Especially if you didn't have front traction before. One thing to keep in mind is that the agenda traction is pretty long. So the position of the traction on the board is important, but again, you don't want to sweat the millimeters and centimeters. I would just worry about the inches. So get it about where you think you need it to be, and a good way to test this would be to stand beside your board if you had it on the ground in an athletic position, or where you feel like your feet normally, or how far your feet are apart when you're out there riding. You want to put your back foot obviously in line with this back. Don't stand on your board, just stand next to it. And then just kind of watch where your front foot goes and where it lands. And before you do this, I want to say, while you have your front traction off, a lot of times boards can kind of start taking abuse. It seems like at your front foot first instead of the back. I'm not really sure why. It may just be that the fiberglass starts thinning out on here first and there's less foam in there for rigidity. This was a really good time to kind of inspect your board. I've already done that before our video started and everything's good here. But you can kind of notice heel dents and stuff like that. If you do see a heel dent, don't worry about the heel dent so much as just kind of know, okay, that's where my foot typically goes. If you see any cracking, if you see any delamination or little bubbles, or where it looks like your fiberglass is no longer touching the foam, go ahead and get a repair kit and try and fix that up first before you put your traction on. I already have measured, and I know that this front traction needs to end just a touch below my Wakesurf Media sticker on the board. So I'm going to go ahead and just commit. Well, we got the Voodoo hooked up with the traction on the top here, just like that. Everything looks great. Love that red, white, and blue. I tell you what, let's go throw some fins on it, see if we can't get punted.